Well, I spent a little time this week examining some of the passages that are present in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, making reference to labor and laborers. And I was impressed with the number of laws that were part of the 900 plus laws that the Jewish community all through its history was obligated to live by. And one of them had to do with paying for those who were part of one's employment. This is what Deuteronomy, the 24th chapter, verses 14 and 15 have to say. Do not take advantage of a hired man who is poor and needy, whether he is a brother Israelite or an alien living in one of your towns. Pay him his wages each day before sunset, because he is poor and is encountering poverty and counting on you. Otherwise, he may cry to the Lord against you, and you will be guilty of sin. Now, apparently the common practice was to pay them the next day, and if you didn't feel like paying them, you could wait for a week or two and then maybe not pay them at all. But it became very clear to those who were living their lives as followers of God that Yahweh, Jehovah, Elohim, however you might pronounce God's name, expected you to be just and responsible in your employment of people. Now, there are some other passages that I'll share in a bit. I want to share a little bit about the history of my father and my mother. Both of them grew up in the early part of the last century. My dad in the early part of the first decade, and my mother a bit later. My father, at the age of probably 8 or 9, after 4th or 5th grade, because the family was so large and in such great need of income, was taken out of school and sent to a farmer to be an employee of that farm owner. He never then went back to school. At the age of 16, he ran away from home. He joined the Marine Corps and was in the Marine Corps for 4 years. Was apparently a pretty angry guy in lots of ways, and was a boxer and did a lot of fighting in his time in the military. Spent some time in isolation for some of his behavior. He came home and got into an argument with the family and left at the age of 20 and didn't come back for 10 years. During that time, all across the nation, he worked as a threshing crew member in Nebraska and Colorado, Kansas. He got as far west as California, worked as a bouncer in several nightclubs and bars. He was also a crew of those who set up the tents for circuses, and he did that for a period of time. He got into Arizona, New Mexico, worked on various ranches, riding a horse and breaking horses. And I managed to avoid breaking his back, his hips, or any of his other extremities. He got into Louisiana, and he loved that job because he got to be a shrimp boat crew member. And he loved shrimp, and he loved Cajun, and he loved the spiciness of the food. Came back home and got a job working on a potato farm in Upper Michigan near Iron Mountain. And I still remember the name of the owner, Potassi, the Polish owner of a potato farm. He met my mother, a rather spicy way in which she told him about whether he would marry her. Got a job after they'd been married, working in the mines, and I've told you the story about that, and was very fearful about his job because he was the one who lit the dynamite, and if the fuse went off, he had to go back and relight it, as short as it might have been. My father then moved down with my mother, and where I was born, to Milwaukee, became part of the workers in a meat packing company. That was not good for him. He developed a fairly serious case of pleurisy and near pneumonia. Doctor said, you got to go where it's drier climate. So back up to northern Michigan. My father worked as a trucker for Yellow Truck Line and LCL, which was a trucking company that was cross country. He worked in a factory making Monarch ranges. Some of you may remember those really excellent wood burning ranges. Worked in a plant that provided the military during the Korean War with shell casings. My father worked hard, and his body in time began to show the hardness of his living as well as the hardness of his work. Got a job working for a farmer, and what it provided us was a home to live in. We had a small 40-acre farm, which was just a basic farmette. Working for this new farmer job, he was in the bull pen, and the bull gored him in the stomach and caused a fairly severe injury, and he was laid up. And then it was decided that this was not the kind of work he ought to be doing. So by then I'd gone to college, and Dad and Mother moved up with my brother and sister to Oshkosh. And he got a job working as a custodian at the student union. He loved that job. It was good to be with young people. It was exciting to see their vibrance and their enthusiasm. And then when he retired, he got a job working at our church, the Algoma Boulevard Church, as the church custodian. My father loved to work. Work was important to him, not because he enjoyed it most of the time, but that was part of his identity. It was part of his sense of who he was and his deep commitment to support his family. My father was proud of me when I graduated from high school and then went to college. They didn't have any money to help me, and so I worked raking leaves in the fall, changing storm windows for houses, sometimes on a double extended 20-foot ladder. How I survived that is amazing. Got a job working in a dormitory where I met Nancy. My job, because I was the low man on the totem pole, was to clean the grease pit. If any of you have ever done that, it's not a particularly desirable job, but it paid me a wage. In the winter time with my roommate friend, we would go down to the lakeshore where there were some fairly nice homes that were oftentimes lived in by older people, probably older than me. And so we shoveled their sidewalks and driveways, and then went back in the spring and put the storm windows down and put the screens back up and raked leaves. I mowed a cemetery or two as well as a high school student, worked in a auto parts store, and worked in a hardware store where Andy, our son, yesterday was talking about this place he had gone to that had an antique shop, and in it was ladder. Remember that ladder that you'd go up and you'd have to go up because at the top were things that would be stored that wouldn't get used very much, but you could roll that ladder all along the length and depth of that, and then you got to count all the nuts and screws and bolts and weigh the nails and all that kind of silly stuff when it came time for proving how much you had on a resource. I loved the jobs. I also worked for a short while as a helper detasseling corn. So if anybody is wondering, am I a workaholic? Yes. Do I love to work? Yes. And in some respects, it is at least part of my identity as a person, as an individual. When you're able to work by choice, or when you work to support your family, or when you work to support a goal that you have, an automobile, or whatever it is, college education. Those are willing choices because you know that when you work, you're going to get paid. And when you get paid, you can save a good portion of that, and then you can support yourself. My parents loaned me $100 in the 4 years I went to college, and I paid them back. The rest I managed to raise through the odd jobs I had. I say these things not to brag or to be bold, but to say there is some incredible need for a sense of dignity to one's work, and I felt there was dignity to it. I could help people. I could assist folks who couldn't do the chores around their home themselves. I could do something that somebody needed done, and I know that they would be grateful for my being on time every time, working extra if I needed to, that indeed the employer would have respect of me as their employee. When you are forced to work, that's a different matter. The question is then, how can you feel dignity and pride when you're forced to work? Whatever that work may be. Tragically, it seems to me, the moment in time in which the Deuteronomy was written had an interesting passage. And this is what the passage has to say. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. This is coming not from Deuteronomy, from Leviticus. This is a statement. It's also a law. And they come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and the members of their clans born in your country. And they will become your property. You can will them to your children as inherited property and make them slaves for their lifetime. I'm astonished, frankly, that at that moment in time, the Israelites were not aware of the pain and the suffering that they themselves as slaves had experienced. But somehow that hadn't gotten to them. And it didn't get to them and to us for a long time. And there are nations yet that still practice slavery, where humans are considered property. For that matter, it was a long time before we decided that women were not property of their husband. And as a result, women were expected to do exactly what they were told to do, or indeed some form of corporal punishment would occur. Now, it's clear that Jesus saw at least a little glimmer of hope in his message. And so his response was not just to the Jews, not just to the Jewish people, but Jesus' response was to everybody. And so he identified persons as having the right to be responded to when they had a need by him. And he made several comments to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, to the priests of the temple, that they were ignoring the stranger, the sojourner. They were ignoring the person who was hated by them as being the one who could be blessed by God. If you want evidence for that, just look at their hatred toward the Samaritans. Think about the way in which Jesus would point out when he would come into a meal and they would not give to him the honor of having his feet washed. The sinners saw Jesus as someone worthy of their loyalty and devotion. As we talked about a while ago, the woman who walks into a meal that Jesus has been invited to, there are other people, there are disciples and others, and there they are. And Jesus hasn't been given the honor of having his feet washed and oil placed on his head. She comes in, and they're unaware of her need for wholeness, her need for attention from someone who could give her relief from her painful life. And she comes up and she recognizes Jesus and she washes his feet with her tears. I mean, they're flowing from her eyes and she's wiping his feet clean with her hair. What? That's the strangest thing. And they said, does this man know who she is and what she's all about and what her sin is? As if the sinner couldn't respond faithfully both to them as well as to Jesus. And then she offers oil, and one of the disciples has the gall to say, that's expensive oil. It could be used to feed the poor. And Jesus said, no. Honor, give dignity to her devotion and to her love. This was her work of love, her labor of passion toward this Jesus who she understood to be the one who could give her freedom from her behavior. Well, the words come clearly to us that work is important and special to us. And again, there were ways in which the Jews understood some other new ways. Jeremiah, for instance, said, "Woe to him who builds his palace by unrighteousness, his upper rooms by injustice, making his countrymen work for nothing." He says, "I will build myself a great palace with spacious upper rooms, so to make large windows in it, panels it with cedar, and decorates it in red." Does it make you a king to have more and more cedar? Did not your father have food and drink? He did what was right and just, so all went well with him. He defended the causes of the poor and the needy, and so all went well. Is that not what it means to know me, declares the Lord? Is that not what it means to know me when you defend the poor? Micah again says, God doesn't require a great deal of you, just to live justly. Now, we might say, whoa, that's an awful lot. What does that mean? Well, it might mean that we might have to change our attitude about some folks. To live justly, to let your life be identified as a just life. Question is, when you die, what do you want people to know about you? What do you want them to say about you? That you loved your God? Yeah. And then you demonstrated your love by your living justly in the world in which you live. with your brothers and sisters who are of all races, of all creeds, of all religions, and to love kindness, to love kindness, to love it in such a way that you embrace kindness, and then it exudes in the way in which you talk and the way in which you behave and the way in which you live your life. And then all God asks of you is that you walk humbly with God, that you recognize, as Jesus says, that you're poor in spirit. All of us are poor in spirit, that we are spiritually filled with a whole lot of holes, and there is a sense of poverty in our spiritual lives. And the only way to get that filled and repaired and up to date is to respond faithfully by walking humbly with this God, who then will offer to you all that you need. So on this Labor Day weekend, think about the labor that you yet are able to provide. I think of all the people in this church who volunteer, who do things to make this church be alive and active, not only in terms of the witness that you have out in the community, but things that you do, playing the piano and the organ, ushering on Sunday morning, singing in the choral group, giving leadership in the prayer chain, and on and on and on. The ways in which you offer yourself and the resources you have of time and material to praise your God. What a gift of labor. What a wonderful gift of labor. Amen.